Tom Cruise, the eternal maverick of Top Gun, the relentless Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible, and the impassioned soul behind Jerry Maguire. He is far more than just an actor. He is an emblem of fierce dedication, the kind of cinematic warrior who turns every role into a personal conquest. For over 4 decades, Cruise has risked his body, his reputation, and perhaps even his emotional well-being in the name of film. He has clung to helicopters mid-flight, scaled glass towers, and poured raw emotion into roles that burned through the screen like wildfire. His entire career is a cinematic love letter, one penned in grit, obsession, and sheer will. But behind the roaring applause and billion-dollar triumphs lies a man few truly understand. A man whose soul bears the weight of private heartaches, of a childhood marred by instability, of broken promises, and the ache of severed connections. At 63, as Tom stands atop one of the most iconic careers in Hollywood history, the cracks in his armor speak louder than ever. There's tragedy not in his failures, for he has few, but in the silence behind his eyes, in the love lost, the daughter estranged, and the deep solitude that not even fame can fill. One question remains. Can Tom Cruise ever find the peace he's been chasing all his life? His story doesn't begin in front of a camera, but in the shadows of a turbulent childhood. Born Thomas Cruise Maypother 4 on July 3, 1962, in Syracuse, New York, he wasn't ushered into the world with luxury or security, but rather chaos and survival. His father, whom Cruise later described as a bully and a merchant of chaos, ruled their home with volatility. In place of comfort, there was mistrust. In place of protection, there was fear. Cruise grew up watching his mother, Mary Lee, stretch herself thin, working multiple jobs just to feed 4 children. The dinner table was often empty. Some nights, popcorn or stale bread was all they had. There were no lullabies, only the soft sobs of a mother trying not to break in front of her children. These weren't just hard years, they were formative. The wounds of this time didn't fade. They took root, shaping the boy who would become the man millions idolize. His childhood wasn't merely painful, it was a training ground. A place where Tom learned that love meant sacrifice, that safety was a privilege, and that he would always have to fend for himself. When Mary Lee finally left her abusive husband, young Tom, still barely a teenager, found himself taking on the role of protector for his sisters. They moved to Ottawa, Canada, searching for a fresh start. And there, in the strange comfort of a school auditorium, Tom felt something miraculous: release. It was during a play, beneath the stage lights, pretending to be someone else, that for the first time, fear loosened its grip. Acting wasn't simply a performance, it was an escape, a breath of freedom in a life constantly held underwater. But even that glimmer was fleeting. Between moving cities, shifting schools, 15 different ones by the time he turned 18, and silently battling undiagnosed dyslexia, Tom lived in a state of constant upheaval. He was mocked, misunderstood, mislabeled as lazy when he struggled to read. He felt like a failure, ashamed he might be letting his mother down, the very woman who had given up everything for her children. In his desperation, at 14, he sought sanctuary in faith. He enrolled in a Catholic seminary in Cincinnati, driven by a desire to become a priest, to find some meaning, some order in the chaos. But even this refuge slipped through his fingers. Depending on who tells the story, he either moved again or was expelled for stealing liquor. Either way, another dream ended. And once again, young Tom was left alone with the weight of another broken promise. But these setbacks did not crush him. They sharpened him. Where many would have collapsed under the pressure, Cruise adapted. He found survival techniques, color-coding lines in his scripts, recording his own voice and repeating it back, pacing endlessly to drill dialogue into muscle memory. What had once humiliated him, the inability to read fluently, became the source of his precision. Every wound, every insult, every night spent hungry or alone became fuel for the fire he would soon unleash on the world. This was not a story of talent gifted by the stars. It was a story of pain transmuted into power. He arrived in New York in 1980 with nothing more than a battered suitcase, $500, and a heart full of hunger, not just for success, but for permanence. The streets were cruel, the competition ferocious. But Tom had never been afraid of a fight. By day, he scrubbed restaurant floors. By night, He auditioned relentlessly, navigating rejection after rejection like a soldier charging through battlefields. When he finally landed a small part in Endless Love, 1981, it could have been just another line in the credits. But casting directors noticed something in him, something raw, electric. That energy exploded onto the screen in taps, where Cruise's minor role was rewritten into a major one after his performance stole the spotlight. And then came the tidal wave. The Outsiders, Risky Business, and Top Gun. By 1986, he wasn't just famous. He was Tom Cruise, America's golden boy. But underneath the charm, the Ray-Ban shades, and the jet engine cool was still the boy who had slept in near-empty homes and longed for stability. His hunger wasn't for fame, it was for control, for identity, for love. Yet fame, as always, comes at a cost. After Top Gun catapulted Tom Cruise into the stratosphere of pop culture, the world fell in love with the image, the aviator-clad hero, the smirk, the swagger. But Cruise himself was already chasing something deeper. While the public saw the rise of an icon, Tom felt the weight of the expectations that came with it. Was he just another pretty face floating on blockbuster success? Or could he become something more, an actor of depth, a performer of conviction? He chose not to coast, but to dive deeper into the fire. Instead of clinging to his action hero persona, he made a daring move, The Color of Money. Acting opposite Paul Newman, a Hollywood titan, Cruise put himself directly in the shadow of greatness. Many thought the decision reckless. One misstep could expose his inexperience, strip away his rising credibility. But Tom was not there to play it safe. He was there to learn, to evolve, and to earn his place. Newman walked away with the Oscar, but Cruise emerged with something more enduring, respect. The young man who once stumbled over simple words in school had now held his own beside a cinematic legend. He wasn't just a star anymore. He was an actor. Next came Rain Man, where he played opposite Dustin Hoffman's extraordinary portrayal of an autistic savant. In a role that demanded subtlety and restraint, Cruise took the back seat, not in importance, but in tone. He didn't seek to overpower Hoffman. Instead, he anchored the film emotionally, guiding audiences through the journey with quiet intensity. It was a performance of maturity, not flashy, but deeply necessary. Hoffman took home the Academy Award, but Cruise once again won the deeper prize, acknowledgement of his craftsmanship, of his growing range. Then, in Born on the 4th of July, Tom Cruise utterly transformed. He shed every trace of the confident, swaggering hero to become Ron Kovic, a paralyzed Vietnam War veteran broken in body and spirit. This was a role that required more than performance. It demanded surrender. Cruise trained in a wheelchair for months. He studied trauma, pain, disillusionment. And on screen, he did not just act. He collapsed, screamed, wept. He became a man unraveling. This was not just another role for Cruise. It was his first time opening himself emotionally in ways he had long resisted. He allowed the wounds of his childhood, the grief of his upbringing, and the rage of lost control to bleed into his character. The gamble paid off. He earned his first Academy Award nomination and proved to Hollywood that he was not just willing to challenge expectations, he was willing to shatter them. And then came the decade of transformation. In A Few Good Men, he stood face-to-face with Jack Nicholson in a courtroom showdown that became one of cinema's most iconic scenes. Nicholson roared with fury. Cruise did not flinch. He held the line, not just in character, but in presence. He proved that he belonged on that battlefield, not as a novelty, but as a force. In Interview with the Vampire, controversy swirled before the cameras even rolled. Author Anne Rice, who had created the character of Lestat, vehemently opposed Cruise's casting. She saw him as too clean, too polished, too boyish for the dark, seductive role. Critics sharpened their knives. But Cruise vanished into Lestat, embodying the menace, the charisma, the existential hunger. When the film premiered, Rice issued a full-page apology. Once again, Tom had turned doubt into triumph. But perhaps his greatest dual accomplishment came with Mission: Impossible and Jerry Maguire, two films released in close succession that showed opposite sides of his genius. In Mission: Impossible, he wasn't just acting. He was producing, controlling, building a franchise from the ground up. He performed his own stunts, defied logic, and pushed boundaries. He wasn't merely pretending to be Ethan Hunt. He lived the role. Every jump, every climb, every sprint was real. His body, his risk, his commitment. And then, in Jerry Maguire, he flipped the script. He gave us vulnerability. A man broken by his own ambition, stumbling toward meaning. The catchphrases became pop culture staples. Show me the money. But behind the loud slogans was a fragile, soulful man aching for connection. The film earned him a second Oscar nomination and a Golden Globe win. Tom had mastered the art of balancing blockbuster spectacle with emotional authenticity. But even then, he didn't stop. In Magnolia, he delivered one of his most jarring and complex performances as Frank T.J. Mackey, a toxic, hypermasculine motivational speaker whose bravado masked deep wounds. Cruise tore through the role with unsettling intensity, bearing raw emotion beneath the arrogance. The performance shocked critics and stunned audiences. It wasn't just acting, it was exposure. And behind every triumph, every ovation, there were bruises. While the world saw charm and charisma, Tom lived through pain, pressure, and endless discipline. Where others saw strength, he bore the weight of perfection. While audiences marveled, Cruise silently endured. It's easy to admire the success, but what made him a legend was how much it cost. He had conquered Hollywood, but behind the legend, shadows still lingered. And soon, those shadows would follow him home. At the height of his fame, when Top Gun had solidified him as Hollywood's most bankable star, Tom Cruise was not just basking in global adoration. He was also chasing a dream far more personal than box office records. After a childhood marred by instability, he longed for permanence, for the kind of love that didn't vanish, for a home that didn't fracture. And in 1987, he thought he had found the beginnings of that dream with actress Mimi Rogers. She was 6 years older, poised, intelligent, and grounded. For Cruise, still rising, still raw beneath the polish, Mimi offered a sense of maturity and calm he had never known. Their marriage, while brief, would shape the rest of his life. It introduced him to Scientology, a belief system Mimi was already committed to, and one that would soon become a central pillar of his identity. But the marriage itself wasn't built to last. Their schedules clashed, their energies diverged, and in 1990, just 3 years later, it ended, quietly, without scandal. Yet the echoes of that relationship would reverberate through every chapter that followed. Because with Scientology, Cruise found more than spiritual guidance. He found structure, purpose, and a new way of controlling the chaos that had once defined his youth. For a man who had always felt adrift, this was anchoring. Then came Days of Thunder, and with it, Nicole Kidman. Their connection was electric. Nicole wasn't just beautiful. She was radiant, intelligent, graceful, and ethereal in a way that calmed the whirlwind Tom often lived within. In her, he saw not just love, but sanctuary. Their 1990 wedding was no mere celebrity spectacle. It was, for Tom, a declaration. This time, the house will not break. This time, the dream will last. And for a while it did. They adopted 2 children, Isabella and Connor, and for a time, their home was filled with the warmth Tom had yearned for since boyhood. It wasn't just the red carpets or movie sets. It was the ordinary that grounded them. School pictures on the fridge, shared glances across the dinner table, late-night rehearsals with color-coded lines, Nicole's laughter in the kitchen, takeout dinners and quiet nights. For a fleeting moment, Tom Cruise wasn't just a superstar. He was a father, a husband, a man finally at peace. But peace is rarely permanent. Not in Hollywood. Not in life. The first fracture came quietly, in a hospital corridor, with hushed voices and a word that collapses futures: ectopic. The child they had hoped for vanished before ever arriving. Nicole's grief became silent and profound. Tom, desperate to heal what he could not fix, threw himself into work. And though they tried again, and briefly conceived, a second pregnancy ended in miscarriage. This second loss cut even deeper. There were no headlines. Only a crib never used. A tiny room that remained too quiet. The heartbreak didn't destroy them overnight, but it shifted something vital in their foundation. Nicole retreated inward. Tom ran faster. And in that distance, cracks began to form. Slow, invisible at first, but relentless. They mourned differently, loved differently, survived differently. And in the midst of that emotional turbulence, their careers continued to soar. Fame, often mistaken for fortune, has a cruel way of disguising sorrow. Publicly, they remained the golden couple, radiant, united. Privately, they became passengers on diverging paths. Tom's growing devotion to Scientology deepened. Nicole respected his beliefs, but the space between their spiritual paths became a wall too wide to bridge. And behind that wall, intimacy eroded. The life they had carefully built, the laughter, the routine, the quiet, became muffled. In 2001, the marriage ended not with a slow fade, but with a sudden rupture. One moment, they were Hollywood's golden couple. The next, Nicole was staring into an absence she couldn't explain, and Tom was reeling from the collapse of the vow he had most treasured. I will never let my family break like mine once did. For Tom, the pain was more than personal, it was existential. He had sworn never to repeat the chaos of his childhood. And yet, here he was, standing in the ruins of his own promise. He was not the man who walked away. He was the man who stayed, but who could not hold it together. Fame had handed him crowns, but it had not taught him how to protect a family. Nicole, too, carried her wounds. The quiet grief of being separated from the children she had called her own. The haunting silence in rooms that once echoed with laughter. She later admitted, "It was a shock to me. I thought it would last forever." Her voice, even years later, trembled with disbelief, the kind that comes only when your entire future dissolves in an instant. And then came Penelope Cruz. On the set of Vanilla Sky, she entered his life like a reprieve, radiant, grounded, and with a fiery independence that Tom deeply admired. After so much heartbreak, Penelope was not a replacement, she was a light. Their romance was quieter, steadier. They wandered through cities hand in hand, sharing meals and secrets not about film, but about fear, loss, and the stubborn hope that love could still be possible. They lasted 3 years. And though there was genuine affection, the core difference remained. Scientology, which had shaped Tom's identity, created a chasm Penelope could not cross. In 2004, they ended things quietly. No scandal, no drama, just two people accepting that love, even when real, cannot overcome every difference. And yet Tom still hoped. In 2005, he met Katie Holmes. Young, vibrant, with eyes that still sparkled like someone who believed in fairy tales, and Tom wanted to believe again too. Their relationship burst into the public consciousness with an energy so intense it felt surreal. The infamous Oprah couch moment wasn't just spectacle, it was Tom, overwhelmed by the belief that he had finally found forever. They married in 2006, in an Italian castle that seemed pulled from a dream. Katie gave birth to Suri, a daughter who, for Tom, represented something more sacred than all his films combined, a second chance at fatherhood, at redemption. In every photograph with her, his smile softened, his posture changed. He wasn't holding a legacy, he was holding his life. But once again, behind the dream, shadows gathered. Katie's world began to close in. Friends disappeared. Choices narrowed. For Tom, structure meant safety. For Katie, it began to feel like confinement. And by 2012, the fracture arrived. Sudden, silent, devastating. Katie left with their daughter. In just 11 days, the marriage was over. Tom later said, "I didn't see it coming." The words were simple. The pain behind them, immense. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It was the distance that grew between him and Suri, the little girl he once carried everywhere, now growing up in photographs he no longer took. In 2024, when she changed her last name to Holmes, it was more than a document. It was a closing door. Quiet. Final. For all his power, Tom Cruise could not bridge that silence. "I can jump out of planes," he said, "but I don't know how to climb the wall between me and my daughter." That, perhaps, is the cruelest paradox of all. By the mid-2000s, Tom Cruise had already lived through triumphs that most could only dream of. He had loved, lost, risen, and reinvented himself again and again. Yet nothing had prepared him for what came next. Not a failed stunt, not a broken marriage, not even a distant daughter. Because this time, the rupture didn't begin in his heart. It began on camera. In 2005, he made headlines not for a blockbuster or a marriage, but for an interview. When he publicly criticized actress Brooke Shields for using antidepressants to treat postpartum depression, the backlash was swift and brutal. His comments, spoken with unwavering certainty, struck a chord of discomfort. Shields responded with grace, but the damage was done. Audiences who had loved Tom for decades, who had cheered as he flew fighter jets and saved the world, suddenly paused. Was this the hero they had followed? Or was he changing in ways they could no longer understand? Just weeks later, he appeared on NBC's Today Show in a now infamous interview with Matt Lauer. What should have been a routine conversation turned into a confrontational exchange about psychiatry, medication, and personal beliefs. Tom's intensity was unfiltered, his voice sharp, his gaze unwavering. For the first time, the charm that had carried him through every controversy began to feel, to many, like something else entirely: arrogance. The clip played over and over. His rising voice and furrowed brows became a loop of discomfort. In an age before social media, it still managed to go viral in the old-fashioned way, through late-night jokes, water-cooler conversations, and a growing sense that perhaps Tom Cruise, Hollywood's most reliable icon, was starting to unravel. And then came the couch. Oprah Winfrey's stage. 2005. A declaration of love turned cultural spectacle. He jumped. He pumped his fists. He fell to his knees. He shouted about love, joy, Katie. It was genuine, unfiltered. But the world didn't see sincerity. They saw mania. The visual eclipsed the message. The internet turned him into a meme before memes were even a concept. Overnight, Tom Cruise became the punchline. The love was real. The emotions were honest. But the audience, once transfixed by his intensity, began to question if it had all tipped too far. That same year, the fallout moved from talk shows to boardrooms. Paramount Pictures, his home studio for 14 years, severed ties. Despite billions in box office revenue, studio executives cited his erratic public behavior as damaging to his marketability. The message was clear: you can be brilliant, but in Hollywood, brilliance without control is dangerous. For Tom, the betrayal was deep. He had delivered everything Hollywood could want: franchises, fame, loyalty. But now, it felt like the industry he had given so much to was turning away. Not because of box office numbers, but because the man behind the image had become too unpredictable. On film sets, tension began to surface. Thandie Newton later described her experience working with him on Mission Impossible 2 as intense, admitting she sometimes felt afraid due to the immense pressure he imposed, not through aggression, but through his overwhelming desire for perfection. Russell Crowe allegedly clashed with him during The Mummy, a film meant to launch a new cinematic universe. It didn't. Critics panned it. Audiences stayed home. And once again, fingers pointed toward Tom, not just as the star, but as the producer who had exerted too much control. What should have been a rebirth of a franchise became one of the loudest missteps in his career. The blows kept coming. Leah Remini, once a fellow Scientologist, alleged that Cruise had become more concerned with optics than authenticity, staging emotional outbursts for public effect, choreographing moments to maintain the illusion of control. And Mickey Rourke, never known for subtlety, dismissed Cruise entirely, claiming he had become irrelevant. All of it added up, not to a downfall, but to a steady erosion. The image of invincibility that had taken decades to build was now fraying under the weight of expectation, scrutiny, and controversy. For the first time in his adult life, Tom Cruise was not just facing personal loss. He was facing a loss of public trust, and it showed. In 2017, The Mummy was supposed to be his next great reinvention, a return to the franchise world, but this time as the centerpiece of an interconnected cinematic universe. Instead, it was a flop. Critics slammed the plot, the pacing, and more than anything, the overwhelming sense that the film existed not as a story, but as a vehicle for Cruise's ego. He had always been involved, sometimes obsessively so, in the making of his films. But now, his influence was being painted as interference. The line between commitment and control had blurred, and with each misstep, the crown slipped further. But this time, there was no Nicole to lean on. No Penelope. No Katie. He was alone, navigating not just professional embarrassment, but something far more painful: irrelevance. For a man who had once redefined the very notion of a movie star, the thought of fading from the public's admiration wasn't just scary, it was unthinkable. Alone in hotel rooms, Tom would reportedly replay interviews, rewatch old press conferences, trying to understand, where did it change? When did the applause become silence? The boy from Syracuse had once vowed never to be powerless again. And yet, in those quiet moments, watching his own reputation crumble, he must have felt that same cold, familiar ache. The sense that no matter how high he climbed, the ground beneath him could still give way. And yet, if there is one constant in Tom Cruise's life, it is this: he never stays down. After love left him fractured, and the spotlight scorched rather than warmed him, Tom Cruise turned to the one frontier he could still command without compromise: his body. If he could not control public opinion, if he could not mend a broken family, then he would master the one thing that had never betrayed him: discipline, precision, pain. To understand Tom Cruise's path to redemption is to understand the way he treats his body, not as a vessel, but as a weapon, a temple of endurance, a monument built not from privilege, but from pain. He is often called fearless, but that's not true. Fear has always been part of the equation. What sets him apart is that he moves anyway, despite it. Every stunt, every leap, every impossible moment on screen is not just about thrill, it's about control. Control over doubt, over aging, over the narrative itself. And in those moments, when gravity challenges him, when wind rushes past him at terminal velocity, when the cameras roll and he's seconds from collision, that's when Tom Cruise becomes exactly what the world first fell in love with: unbreakable. But the truth is, he is not unbreakable. He breaks all the time. And then he hides the pain. In 2017, while filming Mission Impossible: Fallout, Tom miscalculated a rooftop jump by a single inch. The world watched him slam against a London wall, then hobble forward to finish the shot. But what the world didn't hear was the crack, a clean break in his ankle. In playback, he saw it immediately. "That's real," he said. "That's me actually breaking." Doctors told him to rest for months. He returned within weeks. Each step forward was a scream swallowed, a defiance of biology. "I had to keep moving," he later admitted, because stopping felt worse than the break itself. But that ankle wasn't alone. Over the years, Tom has torn his shoulder, shattered ribs, strained muscles, and endured repeated trauma that would sideline even the most elite athletes. He trains like a soldier in constant battle. His workouts are brutal. His recovery regimen's merciless. In 2023, another stunt sent him spiraling toward the edge. His ribs splintered, every breath sliced like glass through his chest. Crew members begged him to rest. He refused. "Pain fades," he told them. "Film lives." And this has always been the secret. While others act, Tom bleeds. Where others use green screens, he risks his life. For him, cinema isn't magic. It's commitment. It's the refusal to fake anything, even pain. He holds his breath underwater for 6 minutes, hangs from moving aircrafts, climbs the Burj Khalifa with bleeding palms. And each time, it's not just for spectacle. It's penance. It's promise. It's proof that he is still here, that he is still worth watching, that no matter how far he's fallen in the public eye, he can still make jaws drop in a darkened theater. It is not ego. It is exorcism. Because every bruise on his skin is a reply to every whisper that he's lost it. Every scar is an answer to those who said he'd peaked. And every fractured bone is a monument to one unchanging truth: Tom Cruise has never stopped trying to be enough, even when it hurts, even when no one is watching. And yet, even with all this, the toll accumulates. There are mornings now when the joints resist, when that old ankle hums with memory, when a rib never quite healed right reminds him that he's 63, not 36. And the greatest tragedy? The pain he accepts willingly is still easier than the pain he cannot touch: the absence of his daughter. Since 2012, Suri Cruise has grown up largely without him. Her milestones, birthdays, graduations, heartbreaks, have unfolded in a world he only sees from afar. When she chose to take her mother's surname in 2024, it wasn't just legal. It was symbolic, a closing of a chapter that had once promised to be his redemption. "I can climb towers," he once said, "but I don't know how to climb the wall between me and my daughter." And there it is, the paradox that haunts his every triumph. He can defy gravity, but not grief. He can master pain, but not permanence. He can endure applause, but not absence. Today, Tom Cruise lives surrounded by emblems of permanence. His fortune, estimated at over $600 million, is carved into estates across the globe. In Beverly Hills, his $14 million mansion rises like a modern fortress, all clean glass and stone, a monument to mid-century opulence. The tennis courts are pristine. The pool reflects a California sun that never seems to age. And yet, inside, the silence speaks louder than any applause. This is not a home filled with the chaos of children or the soft comfort of companionship. It is a museum dedicated to a life built for cinema, but not necessarily for love. Beyond Beverly Hills, there are other sanctuaries. In Telluride, Colorado, he once owned 320 acres of mountain sanctuary, with landing zones for his helicopters and trails that wove through untouched meadows. It was isolation by design, a kingdom for one. In New York, luxury penthouses once bore his name, skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, overlooking Central Park like some quiet god watching a city that used to worship him. Every property, every acquisition, every perfectly arranged chair and polished marble tile, all of it reads like a man trying to outrun time, to freeze the chaos, to build walls high enough to finally feel safe. But even castles cannot keep out regret, because despite the estates, the watches, the fleet of motorcycles and cars, Bugattis, BMWs, Corvettes, Dodge Challengers, the most dominant force in Tom Cruise's life is what's missing. His daughter's laughter, the warmth of a family dinner, a partner who sees him beyond the myth. And in his garage, those cars, once symbols of freedom and speed, now sit like ghosts. The engine's silent, the chrome perfect, but there are no footprints from a child racing past, no hand reaching over to adjust the mirror, no shared memory tied to their leather seats, only solitude on wheels. Tom's body remains a marvel, a sculpture of stamina, still performing at an intensity most actors half his age dare not attempt. He trains with militant focus. He eats with precision. He moves like time itself is an enemy to be fought, not accepted. But even he knows now, the stunts stay with you. You don't forget broken ribs. You don't ignore joints that creak with every sunrise. He has given everything to the screen, his bones, his blood, his breath. And the cost? A legacy shaped by applause, yes, but also by isolation. At 63, the world still calls him the last great movie star. And maybe he is, because there are no others like him. Not really. No one leaps from helicopters the way he does. No one smiles with that same combination of defiance and charm. No one burns quite so brightly for so long without burning out entirely. But the closer you look, the more you see the truth. He doesn't keep doing these stunts to show off. He does them because it's all he has left. The camera is the only thing that's never left him. The only eye that still sees him the way he wants to be seen. Not as broken, not as estranged, not as forgotten, but as powerful, whole, invincible. And yet he's not. There are rumors of romance, quiet sightings with Ana de Armas, soft laughter at dinners far from flashing bulbs. But Tom moves carefully now. He's lived through fairy tales that ended in legal documents. He's seen how quickly intimacy turns into invasion, how love becomes a headline. So he guards this chapter like a secret, not because he doesn't want connection, but because he knows too well what it costs. He once gave his entire heart to love, and it shattered. He gave his body to cinema, and it scarred him. And yet, he still gives, because giving is the only thing he's ever known. In the quiet, behind the training, the scripts, the glass towers, and the legacy, there remains a boy from Syracuse who once vowed to be better, to be more, to be safe. And that vow still burns. That's why he runs. That's why he climbs. That's why he flies. Because if he stops, even for a moment, the silence might catch him. And in that silence lives everything he could never fix. The marriages that collapsed, the daughter he lost, the hearts he couldn't hold on to, the dream of family that remained just that, a dream. So he keeps filming. Because the camera does not ask questions. It does not judge. It simply records. And in doing so, it preserves the myth, the legend, the man who can do the impossible. But you, now, know more than the myth. You know the man. You've seen what he hides, the weight he carries, the mistakes he can't undo, the regrets he keeps beneath the surface of every smile. And maybe that is Tom Cruise's truest legacy. Not the box office records, not the billion-dollar franchises, not even the death-defying stunts, but the fact that in a world where so many collapse under the weight of failure, he keeps rising. Not because he's unbreakable, but because he knows rising is the only way forward. His life is not a perfect arc. It is a series of leaps, of falls, of comebacks forged in grief. He is not just a movie star. He is a man, scarred, relentless, and still daring to believe in something bigger than himself. And that is why we still watch. Not because he is flawless, but because in every flawed, breathtaking moment he creates, he reminds us that the human spirit can survive anything. Even fame, even heartbreak, even the cost of becoming a legend.